There are rumors going around that I am going to cut somehow or the other the vacation allowances of civil servants. I laughed when I heard that because it was quite shocking, because I had no clue what they were talking about. And I want to assure everybody that it's the furthest thing from my mind to put that rumor at rest and get that behind us. We are in a crisis. We are in a financial crisis, as the CFT has mentioned, is formidable. It's a mountain that's very challenging, a high mountain that has to be climbed, that puts us in a crisis mode going forward. Let me give you a short review of that crisis that I'm talking about. Since 10-10-10 to now, we've never had a balanced budget. In fact, we've built up deficits over those 5 years that amounts to about 60 million in 2015. 60 million while we're supposed to have had balanced budgets. That 60 million, we have to compensate for it. Compensate for it by going forward. We were given by the CFT and the instruction that we have to settle those deficits, and they gave us 3 years to do so, meaning starting 2016, every year going forward, 20 million to settle that item. It means that if we have an average income of 445 million a year in income, we have to start by deducting 20 million from that projected 445 million, so we only have 425 million income, and our expenses have to be limited to that 225 going forward. So even though the income is going to be 445, given the fact we have to compensate going forward the next 3 years, 20 million a year, we only have 425 a year to do that. That's one component. What has not been mentioned before, but also becomes a huge challenge going forward, is starting around September 2016, the debt relief of the Netherlands Antilles that was received 10-10-10, advanced by Holland, payments on that debt relief that ran into a couple of billions, payments has to be start being made on repaying that debt, our share of that debt. Our share of that debt was about 27% because we were part of the Netherlands Antilles. So theoretically and technically, I just mentioned to you, if we have 425, they're giving us 3 years to settle that. We've got to deduct the 20 million from that. But also in the payment schedule is that you have to pay 26 million in September. So actually you need to deduct that also. So you start to get a good picture of the crisis that I'm referring to. Some people think it came in here as a hatchet man and I'm cutting here or trying to cut there, and even ascribe to me cuts that I have not even thought of or I think is impossible. But it has nothing to do that I only want to cut. It has to do, how are we going to survive? How are we going to survive financially? How will we recognize that there's a crisis, that we cannot continue as business as usual? To be able to have a chance over the next number of years to really come back and turn the picture and have a chance to be able to develop further. That is the issue. That's the reality that we have to deal with. Add to that from since 10-10-10 to now, premiums to SZV for sickness and health and what have you were also not paid. And if you add up the amount that that comes up to, it's approximately 70 million that also needs to be settled. You need to add that on top of what I mentioned before. 70 million. You cannot continue accumulating that debt. And if you think that's all, you're mistaken. The same thing holds good from since 1010 to now in payments of premiums to the pension fund for old age pension that we have not paid. That is another 80 million. 80 million. Okay. If you take that picture and you were standing in my shoes and you confronted with it, and by the way, I'm only here 2 weeks. So it might even be the top of the iceberg. But from what we can see now, you're talking about 200 million guilders in debt that you need to now try to settle from a budget, annual budget, which I calculated for you, is now down somewhere to 400 million if you add the 26 million that you also have to start paying back on the principal on the debt relief. Last week I told you that we have to bite the bullet. I mentioned to you, we have a cake, and if you eat the cake, there is no more cake left to be eaten. With that background, you need to understand the crisis and why we need to take measures. We cannot go ahead as business as usual, but steps have to be taken to start curbing things. And there are obligations and contracts that we already have for payments that have to be made. And I say, contracts or no contracts, commitments or no commitments, this is the cake. And if you know where to find the money to meet all of those obligations, let me know, because I can't find it. I cannot find it. So, that's the crisis I'm talking about. Now, no one is popular by saying no and by saying, I can't. But this is not a popularity contest that we're dealing with. We're dealing with survival, financial survival. We're dealing with how are we going to keep our house in order? How are we going to have safety and police protection? I think we're going to have to row with the oars that we have, because there are no more oars that we can row with than what we have, and we will have to adjust to the means that we have. So the things we were doing before, we cannot continue to do going forward. That's the sad news that I have, and unfortunately I'm the one who have to deliver it. But somewhere, somebody has to say, the buck stops here to start with the efforts to make a turnaround. So I met with the CFC and we had open and frank discussions about it, and seeking ways and means to see how we can overcome this challenge. There's a formula we discussed going forward that I hope I can accommodate and get some kind of reason to this madness. One of the things that I want to mention and propose to the Council of Ministers is that there have to be a stricter control on the budget of each ministry. The control has to be, in my mind, monthly. Monthly. Not once a year and then let the budgets be expended, and then you will find out, well, this ministry is over budget, and that one has no more money left in their budget, but that their alarm bells would go off whenever there is a threat for exceeding the allotted budget to a ministry. So I'm going to propose a method to the Council of Ministers, and I hope that they will adopt it. Actually, they have little choice because, as I said, we're in a crisis. To make certain everybody stay within the budget. And a budget is only a piece of paper saying this is what we're going to do within this framework. But besides the budget, you also have a liquidity question. Even if it's in the budget, do you have the liquidity? And I got to tell you that because the liquidity is rock bottom, that I just signed and requested an overdraft of $5 million to take us until the second week of January, because the liquidity is not there. Even if it wasn't the budget, which budget is not there, because as you know, the 2015 budget was never completed. It was withdrawn because it didn't comply with the CFT requirements. So you're going back to the 2014 budget, but the 2014 budget, you have real numbers for it, and you know right now that that budget was 20 million in the red. So there is no budget. So when I'm told, yes, Mr. Gibson, Minister Gibson, we have space in the budget, they don't. It's not there. So when they ask me to go along with it, I tell them, so I can't. I cannot create something out of nothing. It's not there. We cannot spend it. I think I want to leave it there, and I think it's enough bad news for one day. And the other ministers will give their opening statement, and then should you have any other questions, I'll be happy to address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Gibson.
Can I just add one other thing?
Sure.
One other thing, which I think is very important. After singing all of this bad news and our inability to pay, and the buck stops here and somebody got to hold the line, we have an obligation and we have a duty. Because it's not their fault. It's our fault. Nobody else. And I am not the one who wanted to be the Grinch who stole Christmas. So I'm discussed in the Council of Ministers, although I have not made that proposal yet, but I'm thinking about it and asked my department to please look that for the Christmas season, to the lowest scales of employees working for government, and I'm looking at scale 5 and below, that we give to them a small gift. I'm thinking around 200, 250 guilders per person, so that they could have something extra for Christmas, because I'm saying, if you bad spend and you didn't control your budget and you didn't, why should they suffer? Second thing I want to mention. Tomorrow, I'm going to the Parliament in connection with legislation that has been submitted to Parliament on the increase of motor vehicle license plate taxes. It's an across-the-board increase of 18.6%. There is no consideration given to the social aspect of that legislation, in my opinion. Why should I, who drive an SUV, pay the same as somebody driving around in a little Volkswagen? There's something unfair there. And that should be corrected and should be adjusted. So this legislation was submitted by the previous government, and I think it was done to raise 1.6 million in additional revenue for the 2016 budget. I'm going to ask Parliament to hold this legislation so we can do it right and so we can build in the social measures to make certain that those who drive in bigger, more expensive car pay more, and those who drive in less expensive cars and smaller cars pay less. That will take some time to get that into the legislation, but my intention is not to go through with that legislation tomorrow.
Our society is made up of morals and values. What do we mean by morals and values? Morals are also called principles. Morals are habits with respect to right or wrong conduct. Morality is ultimately a personal compass of right and wrong. Values are standards or ideals. Values are important and lasting beliefs shared by the members of a culture about what is good or bad and desirable or undesirable. Values have major influence on a person's behavior and attitude and serve as broad guidelines in all situations. One important result of morals and values is integrity. Without morals and values, there can be no integrity. The word integrity is much used in our society of late. That is understandable, because integrity is one of the main building blocks of a well-functioning democracy. Without integrity, corruption can take hold of a community. Corruption is defined by Transparency International as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. The gain can be either financial or non-financial. In a worst-case scenario, extreme corruption could lead to poverty and could be the cause of hardship. An impoverished community can quickly turn chaotic and unstable. This scenario should make it clear that the fight against corruption is necessary. More importantly, every one of us, as citizens, must take responsibility for this fight. We should all be concerned about the spread of corruption, which can be compared to a virus capable of crippling government, discrediting public institutions and private corporations, as well as having a devastating impact on the human rights of populations.
My presentation is very short. Last week, prior to becoming minister, I had planned a trip to Cuba, tourism related. As part of becoming a minister, I had to resign my position as president of CHTA. But nonetheless, I had a trip that I had arranged already. So I changed the agenda of the trip to be focused on healthcare. Financed the trip myself, so Minister, you can rest assured, it didn't cost the government anything. So during my trip, I met with the director of Cuban Medical Services. So basically, this is the, let's call it the commercial arm of the healthcare system in Cuba. Cuba has developed a good reputation for providing quality health care, and it is free for the Cuban population. But in their hunger for foreign exchange, what they're doing is they're opening up their services, obviously, for other people to use. They've already worked with a number of countries in the Caribbean where patients are referred to Cuba for medical treatment. So we've entered into some discussions about the possibilities of doing that. But they also have an excellent educational system. So we're looking at the possibility of using their educational system to send some of our people there for training. We've also entered into some discussions about the possibility of Cuban physicians perhaps rotating through St. Martin. So these are all very preliminary discussions, but the idea is if we can access high-quality medical services at a competitive rate, and that's what they're saying. They say that their rates are extremely competitive. So I'm going to begin by starting to check references with the countries that are already using their services, see if I can get some feedback in terms of how that's working. And then based on that, we will continue further discussions, and obviously at some point I'll bring in SZV and other players into that discussion. In general, I think the trip was very productive. I think it has a lot of promise for St. Martin, and hopefully it will be a cost savings measure for us. I did take the opportunity while I was there to visit their Clínica Central Sierra Garcia, so that they could show me some of their medical services, their CAT scan machines, MRIs. I said, you know, to be quite honest, I mentioned to them some of the questions were about language. All the doctors that I met there, the nurses I met there, they all spoke multiple languages, including English. And I said one of the other questions, or one of the concerns, was the facilities, whether they were really up to date or if they were older facilities. And I saw that they have a lot of very modern equipment as well. So the buildings are obviously a little bit older, but actually even in the US, many times the hospitals are older as well. So I felt comfortable that they do have very modern technologies available. The other thing I did mention is, because internet access in Cuba is an issue, I said, you know, you have people that are coming from a foreign country, obviously in a stressful time period. They want to maintain communications with family. So I said, for me, I know it sounds like a small thing, but I think having Wi-Fi access for patients when they're there in Cuba is critical. And they said they agreed. It's something that they're in the process of working on. So I think it's a viable opportunity for St. Martin, at least worthy of continued discussions and exploration. They have even consulting projects. So for example, they're working at the request of the Prime Minister from St. Lucia in terms of helping to give them feedback in terms of building a new hospital, what types of services. So I think there's many avenues that we can pursue in the relationship. The other topic I want to talk about is, yesterday we had a conference. I met a gentleman, he actually had a Singapore model workshop in Barbados earlier this year, which I attended. I've always been very impressed with the way Singapore operates. So the consultant was actually in Anguilla, managed to bring him over here for the day on his way back to Singapore. So again, Minister, cost savings, not very expensive for the country. And what we had was a meeting in a tripartite setting. So representatives from the unions, from the business, and from the civil service, from the Ministry of VSA. And really it was a discussion about, you know, what another country has done, how they've succeeded. Singapore has an amazing track record for many of the things that they do. So that Singapore model, I think, makes a lot of sense. The tripartite model is very much ingrained in the way they've developed their labor laws, their foreign immigration policies. And so really the idea was, I think too often people have a tendency to say, oh, that'll never happen in St. Martin, or that can't be done, or... So I felt that by actually listening to somebody and actually being able to ask them questions about how they've done things in another country would be a great way for the tripartite to start working together and get rid of this notion that it can't be done, that it'll never happen. So the fact is, it can be done. There are things that we can do that will free up the labor market, that's to the benefit of the people, benefit to the employers. The sense around the room is it has to be a win-win-win partnership, meaning government needs to win, employers need to win, and employees need to win. In the end, if one group feels like they've sort of, you know, beat everybody else, it's not going to last, it's never going to work. So the idea of finding a structure that everybody's happy with, I think, is critical, and that's the tripartite vision, which I support very much. And so we had a great discussion, a lot of interesting conversations. I think people left the meeting feeling encouraged, excited, stimulated, open to new ideas. So the fact is, we need to lay out a model for what we think is what are projects for the tripartite, and then figure out how to get it done. And at least I hope that we are past this, it can't be done in St. Martin.
This morning, I just want to touch on two items, mainly have to do with the traffic situation in and around Philipsburg. I know residents and visitors alike, of course, are suffering from the frustration for the traffic situation in and around Philipsburg. So the ministry, together with the traffic department, we are looking at ways to alleviate the traffic situation a little bit. And one of the things we're looking at is opening the ring road for one-way traffic out of Phillipsburg. We was looking at if we could do a two-way situation, but seeing the situation at the roundabout at the salt pickers, that would create a hazard with if you're using the direction coming into Phillipsburg. So it would be a one-way access from out of Phillipsburg, starting at Ketty's Kitchen, straight down to the gentleman that sell the coconuts across from the sports auditorium. And that way we could alleviate the traffic a little and get in around the peak hours, the traffic situation a little bit under control in the Phillipsburg area. We are busy with the proposals. Sketch will be made and publicized how we will go about that. We will rearrange the sandbank situation and also create a few hundred more parking places on the ring road as well. And we would encourage people who are going to do their Christmas shopping and so forth in Phillipsburg to use the parking along the ring road, and then they could walk into Phillipsburg and do the shopping and so forth. Because we know parking situation in the heart of Phillipsburg itself is almost impossible. So that is one of the issues we're looking at. We're looking to address that as soon as possible and to bring some needed, alleviate the traffic a little bit in the Phillipsburg area. Next issue is the stoplights at the Prince Bernard Bridge. We have a situation where we always a quick fix, and then after a week or two, we're back to the same situation. We had a company do assessment of the situation, and those stoplights have been installed, I think, more than 20 years ago. And they reach their limits, and we have to, we did an assessment, and there is some needed repairs that need to be done. Also, the crossroads there are a traffic hazard. So we are busy now in negotiation with a company to do a total refurbish of the traffic light situation and try to get that, and that also will help, especially in the morning hours with the traffic situation there, to alleviate that a little bit as well. So those are the two things we're working as the Minister of Finance indicate. Once the budget is drafted, and so we could look at other projects and priorities that the ministry can carry out in 2016 for the populace.